but it's the ability to bring those voters with you.
It's complicated and you don't need to worry about it.
It's been very well canvassed that as a party, we don't think the way that Darlene acted was in line with our values and principles.
I really had to think about, how am I going to change things up? How am I going to get through this? Because I don't want to fail.
It is foul and personal and violent.
Job is to make sure that we're showing New Zealanders that there is an alternative to the divisive approach of this government, that you can bring people together.
I mean, I think one of the things that any government of whatever stripe has to realise that every minister has to be a climate minister now.
When you've got a country that's got a young population but they don't get involved, you might want to have a grown-up chat about that.
We don't want a situation where government dictates the local government, but you want to make sure the system is set up so that it's easy for communities to make the decision.
I'd be really interested to see if the officials that advise that a Crown Observer was necessary or should be put in place, or whether he's made that judgment call himself.
I don't think we did, and I've said this, I don't think, because it happened quite quickly last time, I don't know that we did a good enough job of bringing the public with us.
Remember, just by having married wolves doesn't guarantee that mana whenua are going to be represented around the table.
Suggests that whānau with a disability and those who care and support them are somehow grifters.
Hello there.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Colonizer Karmic Election Day. That's actually the poll that we're running at the moment on my YouTube page, if people want to go and join. Is today Valentine's Day or Colonizer Karmic Election Day? Because as history tells us, this was the day that Captain James Cook met his end, because he did something really ridiculously stupid in Hawaii. He tried to kidnap the local king and hold him to ransom, and the locals weren't having a piece of it. So it could be both. You might want to celebrate Valentine's Day by celebrating what happened to Cook.
I feel like we say this every week, but yeah, not a big show.
Every show's a big show. It's brilliant. We have two amazing people on. We've got Nick coming in a little bit later again to have a discussion about disabilities. This has been in the news this week after stories of people who haven't been able to continue affording care because of the government cutbacks, and it'd be interesting to have a chat to them. But before that, we've got Snape from Community Waikato here to have a chat about everything that's happening in the community sector and having a look over that report that came out this week, the State of the Nation report from the Salvation Army. So should we jump straight into that one?
We shall.
Okay, let me just find the right thing to press. I've got buttons. It's brilliant. It's like technology at my fingertips. I love the dramatic sound, like the dramatic.
I was just looking at the images you had there. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We've upped the ante this year.
Hey, great to be here, guys. It has been it's awesome. Every year, the last 18 years, I think, the Salvation Army has done a State of the Sector survey. It's quite unusual for the community sector to have access to really good sector-focused and deliberate data. And it's really robust data, right? Like, they do OIAs of government agencies to get their crime stats, to look at what's happening with social housing. They put it alongside what we've got in terms of data around Stats New Zealand, but also they pull from the community sector and their own experiences in terms of quantitative data, but also qualitative stories about what's happening in the sector. So, yeah, this is an exciting time, as it is every year.
Was there anything in this year's report that's jumped out at you as surprising?
I think these reports are sadly never surprising. And I know that's probably like, it's unfortunate, right? We know what is going on. We feel it in our bones. We see it every day. So we know the story isn't great. What's helpful is having some of the numbers behind it to give some substance to the feelings we have, the observations we have anecdotally. So, yeah, helpful. Probably, if there's a surprise, it's the extent to which some things have changed, unfortunately in the wrong direction. I think the food need was really interesting, that there's 40% higher food need than pre-COVID times. And the sense was that COVID was going to be the peak of food need, right? Like there was a sense of, that this is the toughest time and people don't have access to food, and some people have lost their jobs and or can't access their work and all of these sort of things. So peak food time. Well, it just hasn't changed, and we're 40% higher than at that sort of time period. But even scarier for those of us in Kirikiriroa, which I am, 2.5 times higher than we had in 2020. Like, that is really scary. It's scary because the context we're talking about at the moment is government invested additional money during 2020 and a bit beyond in terms of supporting food banks and food security in our communities. There has been a very specific plan with the previous government, and then moving into this government, to reduce and then eventually remove that additional funding. So that's what we're looking at now. We've seen significant cuts to the food security sector, food banks and the likes. We've seen significant cuts over the last year or so, and we're anticipating a complete cut of that additional support in the next 12 months. Where we know we have
losing that.
The impact is, it's so far beyond even just food need. I was having a conversation today about how important food is for our social interactions, right? For children's learning, for all that stuff. But I was just saying, you know what we're like when we're hungry. It is very hard it's very hard to sit and learn when you're hungry. It's very hard to maintain positive social relationships when you're just hungry and someone is annoying you. It's hard to support your kids and be patient when they are acting out because they're probably hungry, but you're hungry as well. And it's really interesting because the report shows, very sadly, a significant increase as well in adult harm against children. And I don't think these things are completely unrelated. I think these are the sorts of conversations we need to have, because we often look at these things in isolation. Interestingly, because as a sector, we're accused of working in silos and isolation. But actually, when we talk and look at data like this from a government perspective, it's often done very much in isolation and not looked at how these things connect and how they contribute to the fabric of what is occurring in our communities.
Blake, any questions?
So we actually, I don't know if you've seen it, Holly, but there was a unemployment report that came out off the back of this report this afternoon, and one figure I can remember off the top of my head is Maori were disproportionate by a sixth. It was up to something ridiculous like 6.9 or something. So that's not good. And for 33 more thousand more people unemployed since the government took office, and that was provided by Labour's Camilla ballot this afternoon. How does that sit with you as a community person?
You're absolutely right. And in fact, the numbers of unemployment, again, rivaling COVID unemployment rates are higher. Like, this is, in fact, I think they're talking about similar to the 90s when we had horrendous unemployment rates. And that is really critical, right? Like, that is the bigger part of the story. We've got a government that at the moment that prides itself on being leaders and how to run and drive an economy. And that's what we were promised, that this is what the government would bring. And quite frankly, this report demonstrates very clearly it's not doing that. But I appreciate the point you raised there, Blake, as well, about the inequity. Because what we're seeing in these numbers are bad enough. But when we start to break them down and really look at them from an ethnic perspective, we know that the experiences of Māori and Pacifica are significantly worse than like Pākehā and Asian communities, for example. There is absolute disparity. And we don't often talk about the numbers in that way, but we need to. We need to, because that is why we get governments able to say things like, putting in place particular policies is race baiting and it's not necessary. But we know when we look at these numbers, it is necessary. This is about equity. This is about putting resources. This is evidence-based, right? This is going right back to the beginning. It's evidence-based and why you put resources into specific communities to ensure that they have access to the sorts of services and support that they need in order to have an equitable community or society.
And I mean, like, if the number that they're reporting is accurate from the Labour Party, then Maori at 6.9 or around that region, that's not very good. That's another low for the Maori community, and they've already had so many significant blows under this government. So
look, they absolutely have, and you think about that. You think about like those, increases in numbers like that sitting alongside. We know that there's also been significant rises in rental, particularly public rentals or market-based rentals. Certainly not kept up with people's incomes and the likes. We know that it tends to be more Māori and Pacifica communities in those spaces. So, they're more likely to be at risk of having to spend disproportionate amounts of their income on rentals they genuinely can't afford. Yeah.
how do you find that helping your communities then at the moment in this current climate?
I think it's challenging, so Community Waikato is a capacity building organisation. We work with charities that do the frontline service. So we're not in that space, but we're working with organisations who are facing significant challenges at the moment. And I think a really good example is what's happening with a lot of the providers of financial literacy services. Really good example, right? So this is an environment where people need that. We've got people new to poverty. We've got working poor in numbers we haven't seen for 30 years, And so financial literacy services are critical in supporting people to navigate these new spaces. How is it that we look at understanding budgets and understanding incomes and how, like having people advocate for you to reduce or to consolidate your loans and various liabilities, like those sort of things are really critical. This government has done significant work to reduce funding to that part of our industry in the community sector, for example. So understanding how it is that we are able to provide service in this environment, it feels quite critically hostile in terms of retaining or maintaining funding, in terms of ensuring that you'll be able to provide the same or similar service in 3 years' time. It's really hard as an organisation when you have legal obligations as well to the people that you've employed. You're trying to balance that against, providing adequate service or good services across the community, balancing that with capturing the data you need to actually demonstrate that you're doing a good job. It is a really hard time for community organisations who, quite frankly, are just already existing on the smell of an oily rag and a heart full of love for people.
So are you saying that it's not going to be fixed by people just giving up avocado toast in the mornings?
Yeah, it's just sadly not. It is such an interesting rhetoric around how people just make poor choices about the way they spend money. And there's a whole lot of new conversation at the moment around the difference between now and say 40, 50, 60 years ago. The cost of those big items like homes versus the cost of the luxury items like TVs, and how actually we've seen luxury items come right down in terms of cost, and those big important kind of longitudinal items like homes have become so out of the reach of people that you end up choosing the luxury item, right? And that's not even avocado on toast, but why wouldn't you? When the opportunity to actually own a home is so far out of your reach, when you're, sitting in emergency and transitional or public housing, home ownership is it's impossible in those situations.
That emergency housing thing actually brings up a question that I had for you. With any of the groups that you're working with at the moment, how many of them are working with people who are in emergency housing or transitioning housing or not there anymore? Because we keep being told the government has already got rid of 75% of people in those houses and have admitted that they don't know where they're going.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So we work with a number of those groups. I also sit on the board of an organisation called Community Networks Aotearoa, and one of my colleagues on that board is with Housing New Zealand Aotearoa. So we talk about what's happening in this space, and it is, again, this is a very frightening area. There has been a massive drop-off in the number of people accessing emergency housing. And certainly a big part of that, I think, is what the last Labour government did with the amount of housing that they built. And they certainly invested largely in that. That has been cut now under this new government. But certainly they brought a lot of houses on board. And so that's been in the pipeline for, two years, 18 months that are coming on board now. That's contributed to the drop. But there is still 1/5 of those people leaving emergency housing that the government doesn't know where they've gone. So they could be going back into cars or onto people's couches and all of those spaces. We haven't resolved anything, right, when those people are in those positions. And that is really concerning. That's worrying. It's really worrying, especially if they've got children, and that those kids are potentially going to school or not going to school, or moving around schools and moving around doctors, and all of those things that end up also impacting the health and well-being of our communities.
So I've got some housing data here that's come from that report. It says here, new housing consents continued to decline in 2024 and was less than half of what was needed to meet population growth. Rents in lower income communities continue to rise faster than overall inflation, even as house prices remained around the same as in 2023. There were fewer people on the public housing register. Housing and consumer debt per household remained about the same as it has been for the previous 2 years. So it sounds to me like it's just becoming unaffordable to be a poor person who needs a house.
And to be fair, Paul, it probably has been unaffordable for 20 years, this is just getting worse, and that's the frustration, is that we're absolutely not moving in the right direction. We're not shifting a dial. I keep talking about, and I talked about when I was engaging with this research, and it's great research, 100% value and support the fact that the Sallies put this stuff out. But so much of this stuff is systemic, and we can't, as a community sector, shift the dial on systemic issues. When we talk about crime and domestic violence and things like that, we're talking about misogyny, we're talking about racism. The issues are so much bigger than what a community organisation is able to resolve. What we can do is in the space of advocacy and tell stories. But the reality is it's policies, it's government that will shift a dial fundamentally for communities. And that's the frustration, especially when we're being asked by this government to demonstrate our efficacy, to prove how effective we're being. And of course, that is done individually. And this is what neoliberalism does, right? It focuses on the individuals. How do we help that one person? I don't know if you've heard about the story of throwing starfish back into the water. You heard that anecdote? Kids on the beach, there are thousands of starfish on the water. A kid's going back and throwing one in at a time. And a man comes up to him and says, "Why are you doing that? It's pointless. You're never gonna save them all." And he says, "But I saved that one. I made a difference for that one starfish." And that's really important. And that's what we do as a sector. We help individual starfish, but we can't change the tide. And that's what the government needs to do. And this is the difficulty, is how do we hold a government to account to actually make systemic change so that the support we provide for individuals is more than just a Band-Aid. when we know there's still a flood coming behind them, because we're not actually changing anything. Yeah. And I know that it's quite disheartening.
That brings me to my next point, actually. As a community provider with all your different areas, including housing, how does it make you feel when ministers like Tama Porotaka and Chris Bishop are saying, basically in a roundabout way, we don't need to build more houses because there's a backlog from Labour. We're going to add a little bit to it, but not very much. That doesn't sound really good, does it?
You know what? I clearly think that's a naive approach, but I'm also going to give them a little bit of credit here, Blake, a little bit, in that I would go, we have more housing stock than we utilise. Unfortunately, this government is not holding them to account, but we have a housing stock, right? We have an Airbnb market of underutilised, for example, housing that brings in greater income in short bursts to landlords or landowners than perhaps a long-term rental would. You know, I find that problematic. We have people land banking properties, homes that could be accommodated by individuals, but they don't have to do that. And there's no tax on land banking, right? There's no disincentive to hold land and not provide homes for people. So, and you have individuals who might own 3 homes because they have one they live in and one they holiday at and one they holiday at during winter. You know, like, we have more homes in New Zealand that are being utilised for individuals. And I think we need to have some of those harder conversations. And what does it mean then to hold these properties? Should we be taxing them at much greater rates? So it's a bit of a disincentive for it just to be a little bit of joy. Should housing be a market? Should we make money out of what is fundamentally a human right?
And
the dog's very excited.
The dog's found a ball, and my partner is not looking at me to take the dog out of the room and stop him from barking. I've been trying to wave him. Yeah, but no, apologies for that. I try and
we love
the ball out of the way.
The joys of life.
Yeah.
I think Sam's got a question there on that.
I think Sam's question is probably a bit more rhetorical, to be fair. It's, what do you say when someone keeps saying the poor needs to tighten their belt when the belt is cutting circulation to the poor person's leg?
Look, and I think that's absolutely what we should be holding these politicians to account about, because that's the reality, right? Like, you can't tighten your belt when there's no more holes for it to go into. It's critically cutting people's air supply off. You can't do that without asking what's happening at the other end of the spectrum, right? When there are people who have significant wealth, and this myth that they work so much harder than anybody else and deserve this wealth, and that people who are poor haven't worked hard enough, and that's why they don't have wealth. You know, I mean, this is the myth we need to actually have out. We need to have it out. We need to have those conversations. We need to talk the stories so that people see the reality of it, because it's not the truth, right? We know people are working 2-3 jobs to try and stay afloat. They're working very, very hard. Yeah.
I think the dog agrees.
Yeah. He is. He's a little diva. You know, I'm about it. He's a beautiful little guy, but this isn't ideal. Yeah.
This is the joy of live streaming. You get all sorts of interruptions.
Yeah, finally, my partner's seen him and he's pulled him out of the room, so that's fantastic. Yeah.
Before we let you go, is there anything you want to ask about?
Oh yeah, you know me, Holly. I've got a million questions. First of all, you have 3 MPs in your area: Hana Rafati Maipi Clark, Tama Porotaka, and Ryan Hamilton. I almost forgot him. I wish I could. But yeah, those are the 3 that you've got in your area. have you had any conversations with them around the impact of what's happening in Wellington?
Just have you had any conversations? I can just say no.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and this is really interesting because the previous government we had frequent conversations with our local MPs, but certainly not with this one. And they will be having conversations, but they're not having conversations with the community sector. That's we are not what they value right now, is what I'm thinking and feeling. Which is, it's frustrating. I know a number of organisations who have been reaching out, trying to invite them along to things, have these conversations, be a part of what's happening in the sector. It was very interesting that at the State of the Sector, the State of the Nation research launch in Hamilton, we didn't have any MP present at that. And I think that says a lot about, the valuing of this type of data and what it says about our communities, because it actually gives us so much information about what it is we could be doing better. So it was sad, disappointing not to see them there. Probably not a big surprise at the moment with the current environment. And they probably have a lot of other things that they're a little more interested in right now. And to be fair, this is where my interest is. So, I understand that we don't all share the same interests. I do hope that we're able, and that I know the Salvation Army is intending to do some really good advocacy based on this research and information, and other community sector interest groups are wanting to do the same. And I certainly hope that as we elevate the findings from this data, that we start to get greater engagement. And I think sometimes, it's hard when you don't know that it's necessarily going to be that valuable or important. I'm going to give them credit and go, perhaps they didn't realise how important it was. But as they start to see what these findings are, ever the optimist, Paul, ever the optimist, like I'm hopeful that they will go, actually, this is some great stuff, and what can we do and how do we partner to have greater outcomes for our communities?
I am so glad that you're an optimist on this one, because I remember a conversation from Paul Goldsmith. I was looking through the results and doing some research for the video I put out today. And one of the things that cropped up was that there is a increasing rate of imprisonment and re-imprisonment for Māori at the moment. And I found a piece from Paul Goldsmith when they got rid of Section 27 cultural report saying, yes, more Māori are going to end up in prison because of this, but it's fair that only rich people can pay for this service. And so they've been given the evidence on some of these things and they still go ahead and do it. And it's very hard to be optimistic sometimes when you know that they're being willfully stupid like that. That's just my personal opinion, though.
I'm not gonna say you're wrong, Paul. Yeah.
Thank you.
Try to be optimistic, though, because it's really hard to be anything else in our sector. It's a lot of the stuff that we do, we feel we are pushing the giant boulder up the hill, right? All the time. But we see small wins, and we know that governments are swings and roundabouts. And for us, I think for many of us, this is, this is holding on until we see an ideological change. And that's not to say it wouldn't be through a right-wing government. Maybe it will be. Maybe the next government is more of a national league government and doesn't have the same ACT influence, for example. Maybe we will see some wins there. And certainly we know historically under national governments, a lot of there's sometimes been better outcomes for Māori in terms of settlements and things like that. You can't just call one government or the other is going to do particularly well for any particular group, that both sides have had some positives and negatives. I'm just hopeful that the swing to a more progressive and genuinely evidence-based way of understanding how we address inequity, starts coming to the fore. I genuinely hope as we move into a space where we're looking at referendums on Māori wards, for example, that we look to evidence like we're seeing in this report and understand what are the conditions that lie behind this. And then once we start addressing our systems and have greater representation, that we end up having better options across the board, and that results in better outcomes for everybody. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
And now just to completely twist things around, the one question I'm asking every guest that we've got this year, and I already know the answer to this one because I know you this well. Are you registered to vote, and will you be voting in this year's local body elections?
You do know me well enough. I don't think I've ever not been registered to vote, and I will vote in every election I have an opportunity to vote in.
Fantastic. You've got an interesting one down there because you're going to get a new mayor no matter what.
We are getting a new mayor, and I'm starting to have some conversations to figure out who is standing. We might talk off air at some point, Paul.
I like that idea. I definitely like that idea. You can pour me a glass while I'm down there.
Sounds marvelous.
Thank you for joining us, Polly.
Hey, great to actually meet you. You know, at least quasi through this medium, Blake. It's been awesome.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a good
Thank you very much, Holly. We'll catch you later.
Bye bye.
See, that was absolutely brilliant. That report from the Salvation Army is available on the Salvation Army website. And there was one question that came through, which I thought wasn't quite right for the conversation, but does raise a very interesting point. The Kiweasel wants to know, is there a Salvation Navy and a Salvation Air Force? To which I actually don't know the answer.
Probably not.
That seems a shame, because it'd be kind of fun to have the planes. Should we jump straight into our next guest? Because Nick is being very, very patient, waiting for us there in the waiting room.
Yeah.
I mean, we can let him wait for a little bit longer if you want. Your call.
Well, I was just going to say, this next conversation is not very nice. And this is not, before we begin, this is not directed at any outlet in particular. But yeah, we'll get into that. Yeah.
All right, let's do that then. Let's press the buttons. Kia ora, Nick.
Kia ora, Paul. Kia ora, Blake. Good to see you both tonight.
Yeah, I wish you were here under better circumstances, but as usual, not really.
Yeah, I wish I was here under better circumstances too, but you know, this is what we have to talk about.
So, on top of the agenda, I've contacted 43 journalists in the last 12 months and either been promised a callback or messaged a callback and never been followed up. Now, I'm not naming anyone in particular, but 43 different journalists from across the industry. That's not good for our disabled people, is it? Next year, get our stories out there.
No, it's not, Blake. It's not good at all. I imagine that you're going to probably be getting flooded with calls after this conversation tonight. So stand by your phone either after this broadcast or tomorrow morning. But I think you raise a really good point that that disabled voices and disabled issues don't get a fair crack when it comes to the media, and I think that's probably what we need to have a bit of a conversation about tonight.
And to say, and again, not naming anybody, but to say comments like, you know, it's not the right time. We'll call you back later. We don't need to talk about it right now. This is an issue that should never stop being talked about, especially in the current climate. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think there's probably a few things going on. I mean, our media at the moment are fighting against getting a headline out versus Facebook, and that's very, very tough. But that doesn't really. We shouldn't excuse them from talking to disabled people and getting a really good story from our disability advocates, people like yourselves, Blake, and others. So I don't feel like we should be really. We should definitely be holding our media to account and ensuring that disability voices are coming through the media on a regular basis. We don't see enough journalists from the disability community. We don't see enough stories from a disability perspective from disabled people telling their stories. So I think it's really important that that you're really putting your foot down and just not saying that this is not good enough. So for me, this is a really important conversation, and I'm glad to be having it with you tonight.
And the reason why I asked to have this conversation is because earlier this week I had a bit of a, personal issue where I had to take the afternoon off because I just got thrown out mentally by it. It was just the straw off the camel's back. And to have to call people like you and Paul to, and I don't mind sharing this, people like you and Paul to, tell you how I'm feeling. I'm very grateful to have friends like that, but I shouldn't be having to do that in this day and age. And it's just really, really sad. But yeah, I don't know what Paul wants to add to this conversation. But yeah.
Well, I'm actually kind of curious about your experience in this area, Nick, because I know you've done a little bit of work with the Labour Party around this in particular, and you've got some media contacts. You've been in the media a little bit yourself. I know that there was a story that broke today around people in assisted care facilities, for example, where the funding's dried up and there's been problems with them being able to continue because the funding's been dried up that we got told wasn't going to happen. I saw a story yesterday, I think it was, about this, it might have been this morning, the stresses for parents of people with disabled children, and the change to whaikaha that they announced last year with the funding cuts and how much stress that's added to people. What sort of interactions have you had with the media yourself that you've gone, well, this is actually surprising. I didn't expect it to go this way. I didn't think that this would be something that they're interested in, or I was kind of surprised that this is something that they picked up on. Have you come across that before?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be 100% honest around this one. My interactions with media have always been really positive. So this is why I feel a little bit like I need to support Blake on this issue, particularly. Like I have regular contact with journalists, and I talk to them regularly, and we have discussions about topics, and I do really talk to them relatively regularly. We just have conversations about the topics that are coming up, and I talk to them and I say, hey, have you thought about this issue from a disability perspective, and really just start to encourage them to think a little bit more widely around the issues, and just start to just encourage a broader conversation around the daily news cycle, and just start to encourage a discussion about thinking about the current news cycle, or the constant news cycle in a disability context. Because from my perspective, almost every issue is a disability issue, or a disability context to it. I think particularly that's why I was really pleased to have this conversation today, because we did have some really big hitting news come out this morning, particularly the New Zealand Doctor article that came out, peer-reviewed journal article, which basically said that there were some things happening in the community that were at odds with what our government is telling us in terms of the service provision that the community is receiving.
The government not being 100% honest. Are you sure about that?
Yeah. So I think for me that kind of highlights a need for telling the stories, certainly from within the community, and for me that highlights the point that Blake is making, that actually we need to go out there, and our journalists really need to go out there and really start surfacing those stories through really good storytelling through the media. It's okay to publish a story about the report, but it's that next step. It's going out there and talking to the communities, the parents, the disabled people themselves, and for me that's what we may have missed, and where we need to go. And I think we will certainly see that coming more and more as we go through the DSS process, or sorry, the Disabilities Support Services Review process. And from my perspective, this whole year will be about disability services and how they are delivered, whether they're cut, how much they're cut, and how that impacts disabled people's lives. And that's why this conversation with Blake tonight and you, Paul, is so important.
And it brings up an interesting point, because I was just saying a positive note, the media do some great disability stories. Like a positive one. We saw a great one on our NZs this week. That was really, really good. But my argument is it can't be cherry picked. And that's how I kind of feel right now, that they're cherry picking it for one day and then you don't hear anything for 6 weeks, and then they do one other story, then you don't hear for 7. And that's the issue that I really have. There's not that constant barrage of disability stories like you would see with David Seymour driving up the Parliament steps or whatever, National Labour, Greens, Tafari Maori, always in the spotlight, but yet housing, whatever it might be, but you never see a constant flow for disability. And we should be treated in the media the same as all these other topical topics that are on every day. It shouldn't be cherry pick here, cherry pick there. Anyway, that's just my opinion. I don't know if either of you agree
Can
or
I ask you
disagree.
both a question then? Because I don't get to ask you questions very often on this, Blake. How much of this that you're seeing and feeling now do you think is led by the fact that we can watch mainstream media news or read something in the paper and we can't see somebody that we can identify with as having a disability?
It's hurtful, Paul. It's, that the fact that we never see much, if any, disability representation in this day and age is very, very poor. It should have similar representation to our rainbow community, to our elderly community, to, all the different ethnic communities. Why should we be left out? And some people...
I just want to support Blake on that point. I think probably the most high-profile disabled reporter that we've had, or journalist that we've had, is, and I'm going to name her here because I think she deserves to be supported in the work that she did, was Olivia Shibas when she was at Stuff. And she's no longer at Stuff, which I think is a shame, but she's obviously gone on in her career, and that's fantastic. But I think Blake makes the point that when we don't see our community represented in mainstream media, it's very difficult for our stories to be platformed and celebrated and told. And we should be seeing disabled people in the media and in all aspects of society. It's very difficult for our stories to be told when we don't have journalists to tell those stories who inherently understand how, not just how to tell those stories, but how to interpret and portray those stories. So we're constantly, Blake's a great example here. We're constantly pitching our stories to people that just, that they are fantastic people, but they just don't understand our backstories, our life stories, our lived experience, and it's just very difficult to have a conversation with someone who just has no conception of our lives and the experiences that we live. So we need to see far more people from our community in the media to enable that participation to be greater, and also to be able to tell our stories. But the second point that I want to raise here is that's why that what we're doing here is so important, and that's why what you guys are doing with Behind the Walls and the work that you're doing, Blake and Paul, is critical, and it has to go on, because there are so many people in the disability community and wider that are just really hanging on to seeing themselves through the work that you're doing, Blake, and that you're supporting through this platform. So any opportunity that we can have to support that, I think we should definitely get behind.
But this is that point that I'm trying to make. It shouldn't be up to people like Paul and our friends at BHN and people like Sam with us in the ballot. It shouldn't be up to alternative media to take the brunt of the disabled community.
I'm sorry, if you're not a cycle lane, then you're going to get no coverage in the Post. I thought everybody knew that.
Yeah.
I've got a question that's actually come in from somebody online. And Nick, you are the perfect person to answer this one because you've run for Parliament. Is there an element of visibility there in processes like our election process that you think might limit media's need to tell the stories of disabled people?
Sorry, Paul, can you just wrap that question up for me again? That's a long question.
So this question here is about why don't people with disabilities stand for Parliament or local government? And you've done that yourself.
Yep.
As somebody living with a disability, you've stood for Parliament. I don't know if you've run for local government. Have you run for local government before?
People keep on telling me I should, but I'm I'm not that brave.
Fair enough. Right, don't blame me at all. Do you think that the lack of visibility of people out there with disabilities running for these public positions might be something that is feeding into the media going, well, if they're not willing to stand up for themselves or not willing to stand up for their communities, how can we cover this if they're not willing to do that, if they're not willing to stand up?
Yeah, no, I think there's something in that. I think it's very challenging for a disabled person to stand up for elected office. I'm just going to share this anecdote that when I put my hand up that I was going to stand, within about 30 seconds of my name coming out on the party list, I received a huge amount of hate messages coming out, and I mean, I have a tough skin, so I was able to deal with that, but not everyone is in a place where they can deal with that kind of feedback, and I use that term very broadly, but I feel like as a disability community, as disabled people, we need to have options and a pathway where we can move towards elected representative office in a way that's safe for us, and it's also supportive for the disability community, because to be 100% honest, the process that we go through in order to stand, and even that's a terribly ableist word in and of itself, to put yourself forward for elected office is not terribly well suited for disabled people. So we need to have a good hard think about how we make that process more suited for disabled people. And I think we can do that. I'm really hopeful that we can do that. Other countries have done that. I know the UK has done a bunch of work around how we make the process of selection, and then also campaigning, and finally, once you do, find yourself in the halls of Parliament, we can do it. We just have to put some time and energy and focus into prioritizing it, and make it a priority. Because at the moment, it's just not a priority. If a disabled person happens to, almost by accident as opposed to design, end up on a party list, it would happen by accident at the moment, rather than intention or design. Yeah.
If I can just add to that, I think it goes back to the representation issue as to why people aren't running as well, because current and future generations aren't seeing disabled people on our TV regularly enough. So why are they going to bother to run? Because they think, oh, we don't see any of us on TV, so what makes me think I can run? I know I felt like that for a very long time. So I think to Kiwi Royal question, I think it goes back to the representation issue. Because we're not seeing us on TV. I reckon the more that, if we can increase our disability coverage by 30 to 50% a fortnight, or even 30% a week, I reckon we would inspire many generations going forward to run for council, to run for Parliament, because we will see that they will see that representation on a regular basis. And I think that's why there's a lot of issues and a lot of stigma and a lot of hate when people do run, if they run, because it's not well presented on our television screens. So that's what I would add to that.
So I was going to say, Kiwi Rob's actually had a follow-up comment here about a program called Attitude that was on TVNZ. I vaguely recall it. It was a few years ago now. Was this a piece of media that either of you have come across?
Yeah, Attitude's a well-known program that's been going for a very long time. I don't think it's currently broadcasting on broadcast TV, but it's certainly on demand. But it's part of the New Zealand disability community kind of history. I mean, there's so many people that have either been on Attitude or, so it's just part of our history. Very well respected program.
And a follow-up question from Sam, and I think this one's aimed at you, Nick. Could you see a disabled person like yourself winning a safe labour seat?
That's a great question, Sam. Thank you. Thanks for the vote of support. I think it's really important. Like, I'd answer that in two ways. I think it's really important that disabled people are seen as a group that needs to have representation in the Parliament, from a almost a values-based position. But I think it's not out of the realms of possibility that I will put myself forward for an electorate. But I take the position that we need to be in the Parliament to provide a voice for the over 1 million people. There may well be more than 1 million people with the census that's coming up this year. There was 1.1 million people as of the last census that we did. So the fact that we have no political representation from disabled people or of disabled people from the disability community in our Parliament is an absolute outrage. And it's almost, we need to take a principled position that almost every political party, regardless of which side you fall on, needs to prioritize and place very highly up on their list positions disabled people, because our voices are not being heard in the Parliament. They're not being heard in local government at all. So I think for me that is probably the highest priority. I would very much like to represent a local community, but for me, it's the highest priority to represent the community in the first instance, but then also to represent a local community as well.
As we wind down here, I just want to encourage the media to, take on our stories. Give people like me a ring. I'm happy to talk to you and, give you my time. I can't give you my time if you don't give it to me. I don't know what Nick would want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd absolutely be on the same message with Blake on that one. There are going to be some massive issues coming up this year that have a specific disability focus, particularly the Disability Support Services, DSS consultation, the service changes, if there are any changes that come off the back of that, the disability strategy. So there's some huge issues that have a specific disability focus. And I'd really encourage our media to look at those stories through a human lens as well as through the policy lens, and really to reach out to members of our community that are directly impacted. And Blake is an incredible advocate and a person that has a story to tell, and just look at those stories through a personal lens, as well as the policy lens, which is where we seem to find ourselves at the moment. So for me, it's both. You have to do both, and I'd be strongly encouraging our media to pick up both of those strands of the story.
Any comment you'd like to add before we wrap up here, Paul?
I'm just going to show you one last comment that's come through that I've got. It's some bad news for you, Blake, but I think it might be a salient point here. Unfortunately, Blake doesn't make millions of dollars and can't contribute to X story, so no media coverage.
Yeah. Oh, I like that one.
Yeah. Certainly how it felt over the last week. It has been, if you're not David Seymour, you're not in the news.
Yeah. Hey, maybe I just need to drive my wheelchair up the steps.
You're not allowed to take vehicles up the steps unless you're David Seymour, and then you might get away with it.
Any closing comments from you on anything else, Nick, before we let you go?
Well, I don't drive anyway, so that for me is a story that just has no interest for me personally. But I mean, I just really want to just thank you, Blake, for really platforming this issue, because it's an issue that we really need to raise and just remind not just our media, but also the broader community that there are some really important. Yeah, we could get a tractor. I mean, I'd have a go at a tractor, I suppose. You don't need a license to drive a tractor, so I'd be keen on a tractor. Sorry, we digress. Yeah, I'd encourage people to, if there's anything that people can do who are out there listening, or maybe listen to this later, if you are engaging with your local media or your politicians or anyone out there in the public and thinking about stories that are coming up that may or may not have a disability angle, just think about passing on that story to people like Blake, who's more than happy to provide comment and to put his perspective in on a story, because there's going to be lots happening this year.
It's a great way to wind things up.
Thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to do this too, Paul. It's
I charge $58 an hour for venting sessions and therapy, so I'll expect the money in the bank. Like direct deposit's fine. I'll take Apple Pay, whatever.
Yeah. Well,
cool.
Thank you, Nick.
All right, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Now, have I asked you the question about voting? I think I have asked you the question about voting, haven't I? Local body elections. You're enrolled and you're going to vote.
I am definitely enrolled, and I'm definitely going to vote.
Perfect. So Kiwi Rob pointed out, while we're on that topic here, nominations open 1st of July for, I think it's everywhere actually this year, everywhere except Tauranga, because they've got a special election on. So it's coming up if anybody's interested in getting out there and getting your name out or getting involved.
Don't forget, we've got the Tauranga by-election coming up very soon.
Yes, so I will get onto that shortly, very soon. I've got a few things to go through after we do this conversation, so we're getting there. Slowly working my way through my checklist.
Jumping ahead.
All right. Good.
All right, guys.
Awesome.
Really appreciate it. Have a good night. Thank you, everyone.
You too. Thank you, Dave.
Let me try that again. So yes, we've got the Tauranga by-election coming up.
Yes, March the 13th, I believe. March 13th, Sam sent me through the date for It's in the Ballot, because they're going to be covering this. So you can check that out on the It's in the Ballot website. I'm sure Sam will put the details up in the conversations, in the chats, so that we can get a few more details on that. And he's going to be doing a whole lot of coverage for the local body elections. I have one more announcement to make, but I'm going to do that after the news, so people can stick around for the news. And then I'll tell them about what's happening next. So anything you want to add before we jump into the news?
And it's not just 1 week, it's a whole month. But we'll tell you that after the news.
We'll tell that afterwards. Yeah. All right, well, let's go and do the news. Bring it onto the stage and press play and do all the buttons. Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's The News. In the High Court this week, Ngāi Tahu has been arguing that the Crown has left the state of fresh water in the South Island in a terrible state, and it needs to recognise tino rangatira over fresh water for the iwi. The tribe's lawyer is former Treaty Negotiations Minister Chris Finlayson, KC, who, as part of the John Key National Party-led government, whose relaxed attitude to water care and pandering to farmers contributed to the state of the waterways, says, "Now I'm out of government, I can be honest, we done fucked up. International men's fashion expert Derek Guy has questioned the taste levels of Prime Minister Christopher Luxon after he made a social media video promoting New Zealand Lamb Day in a t-shirt over top of his suit jacket. There is a bit of history of Prime Ministers being tied up with fashion, like when John Key decided to wear whatever this was, and Helen Clark and Jacinda Ardern walked the world of wearable art stage, but this is the first time any of them has been called out by the fashion police. In response, the Prime Minister has said, though, that this counts towards their target of 500 new police officers by at least one. A new report from the Salvation Army has highlighted that 400,000 people, or 12% of the population last year, applied for additional help from MSD and peripheral organisations amidst a worsening cost of living crisis driven by economic, climate and recession. The report also found that violence and neglect impacting children had increased and that overall violent crime had increased, although young offender crime had continued a downward trend that spanned the past decade. They called for a fairer safety net social welfare system and a way to lower rents, said the Prime Minister. Seen here taking someone else's job for a laugh, they should just pull up their bootstraps and go door knocking. I'm wealthy and sorted, it's not my problem. The saviour of the economy, the recently announced digital nomad visa, has not seen an increase in visa applications, according to Immigration New Zealand. In fact, it seems to have had the opposite effect. An extra 50,000 views to the corresponding websites were recorded in the first 2 weeks after the new visa was announced, but fewer than 24,000 applications have been received for all visa categories, said Immigration Minister Erica Stanford, seen here calling for an end to the trade blockade around the planet Naboo. We're still working out why no one wants to visit and work here with our historic unemployment, blatant racism, degrading health and education systems, failing infrastructure, and the worst recession since the early 90s. But I'm sure we'll cancel something Māori soon and use the funds to come up with a solution. 7 months after a special election in Tauranga, it's been revealed that new Mayor and former Olympian Mahi Drysdale, seen here wishing he was still on the water and not dealing with the insanity of the most extreme Tauranga locals, still hasn't moved to Tauranga, instead commuting from Cambridge for work. Said Tauranga's most vocal online commentators, well, at least he's not like that lazy Maori councillor who had to quit due to ongoing health concerns. In Tamaki Makaurau, overnight tests on the new rail lines were deemed successful, bringing new transport hubs to busy areas one step closer to fruition. Said Mayor Wayne Brown, "See, Christopher, this is how you get things back on track. Now, all I need to do is find out where this Karanga happy place is. I wonder if it's near K Road somewhere." Southland MP Joseph Mooney, seen here preparing to abandon the sinking ship known as the National Party, was this week caught out accidentally sending a text to Carmel Sepuloni, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, complaining about the ACT Party, saying it's funny that ACT never defend their policies in hearings and never ask questions. In a faux pas likely to be mentioned many times in the future, showing widening cracks in the coalition. When asked for comment, an ACT spokesperson said, "We're not going to defend that and we have no questions. Now do as we say or we'll rip the country to shreds." Serial bitcher Julian Batchelor, seen here looking for his white privilege and not being able to find it despite everyone else telling him where it is and that it's really obvious, made an appearance this week at the Treaty Principles Bill Select Committee hearing where he claimed that God spoke to him on a beach and told him to start a ministry. No, sorry, that's what he said about his failed evangelical church. He held a sign there that read, "Homosexuality is a thing that God hates." No, wait, sorry, that was his protest against the Hero Parade in the 90s, and last year he said his views still stand strong on that particular issue. Oh. He said immigrants should go home. No, sorry, that was from his 2005 run as New Zealand First candidate against Helen Clark. Maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't be listening to anything this person has to say, and just everyone around him should ignore him completely. It was revealed in Parliament this week that 8 out of 10 youth offenders who took part in the same but different boot camp have re-offended and are now back in youth justice facilities. At the time of the launch, Karen Chow, Children's Minister, claimed that the new camps were different to the ones run under the previous national government. Technically, she's not wrong. The success rate for this camp sits at a meagre 10% after the tragic death of one of the attendees, whereas John Key's boot camps had a success rate of 47%. The New Zealand English Teachers Association has exited the Ministry of Education curriculum rewrite process, citing a shambolic process too focused on getting what the course writers want in, no matter how much of a cognitive overload it would cause students or the impossible to achieve workload it would force teachers to undertake. The new curriculum came under fire last year when it was revealed it was being guided by regular disinformation media outlet guest Dr. Elizabeth Rata, seen here sucking up to the MP who gave her a job to rewrite the curriculum by supporting the Treaty Principles Bill, was determined to include the collections of Shakespeare and Beowulf into the program and include cursive writing, and expected she would have final say on the curriculum over the ministry itself, revealed in leaks to RNZ last year. So the fact that uppity teachers think that they know better is clearly not possible. Wellington Mayor Tory Whānau, seen here with a mini version of the Gatekeeper or the Keymaster from Ghostbusters, this week unveiled plans for a revamped Golden Mile project within the city's central business district. The new plan creates more space for outdoor eating, public seating, self-sufficient green areas that filter rainwater before returning into the harbour, and alternative transport use options. But for balance, the Post decided the best person to talk to was the person who came second in a by-election last year campaigning against the changes, who shockingly did not like the changes, and it wasn't disclosed that they were a candidate who ran against these changes in the election, instead demanding more money be spent on fixing pipes, despite a 300% budget increase to water infrastructure projects in the last 3 years within the city. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, seen here playing cricket, a sport you can't score against yourself in, scored an own goal in the House this week when opposition made calls to fire David Seymour from ministerial positions after he wrote a letter of support for Philip Polkinghorne after he had complained that MPs shouldn't interfere in judicial decisions, and he responded with a list of Labour MPs that were fired from ministerial positions as examples of MPs not fired. Of course, this isn't really much of a surprise, since Luxon clearly feels the only sort of MPs who should be punished for not doing their job are women, or lefties. MP Shane Jones, seen here explaining to the waiter how big a pile of free food he wants from the meal that's being paid for by lobbyists, has criticised Te Pāti Māori MP Takuta Ferris for not delivering an apology in the House in English. Ferris was recently found to have called MPs known for not telling the truth liars in the House, which is against the rules for Parliament, and as a result was asked to apologise. Ferris delivered his apology in Te Reo Māori, which as an officially recognised language is permitted, but Jones felt the apology should be in English, which it does not have to be. Jones felt it was important everyone could see and understand what was being said, while Ferris said in a response, "Te rau mātua, Shane. How about taking that approach to cameras on fishing ships?" And finally, the Minister of Internal Affairs, Brooke Van Velden, has used Valentine's Day to release marriage statistics for 2024. More than 20,000 marriages were registered last year, with almost half of those being people in their 30s, and 740 of those people being over 70. Since New Zealand records began in 1848, there's been 12,272 people who have chosen to make Valentine's Day their wedding day. Said Van Velden, "See, even I can acknowledge that you humans have a need for an emotion you call love." And that is this week's The News. Damn muted, Mike. There were so many fun parts of putting this one together. When I found that cricket picture of the Prime Minister, I'm just like, I have to find a way to use this. Absolutely. And then I was trying to find a picture of Brooke Van Velden that made her look kind of robotic, and the Crushinator from Futurama showed up and wearing the same color that Brooke wears in her suits. And it's like, this is too perfect. This is just far too perfect. So, yes. Right. We have an announcement to make.
That I promise not to ruin anymore.
Oh my God. So the next 5 weeks are incredibly hectic on Friday nights for me and for you. So we're going to take a little bit of time off and replace the show with a series of interviews. Just one-on-one interviews, sitting down, in-depth stuff, talking to a whole bunch of people. We've actually got Tori coming in sometime over the next couple of weeks to have a chat about the Golden Mile and what those plans are, and get a little bit more detail on what exactly is involved and how they're going to make that happen. Next week, we should have Shannon Halbert in here, MP for the Labour Party, who is their Rainbow Community spokesperson. We're going to have a chat to him about Pride, because that's on up in Tamaki Makaurau, of which he is also the spokesperson for within the Labour Party. Shannon has a bit of a bugbear with them at the moment around speaking at the big gay out. So we're going to have a chat to him about that and about other things as well that are going on.
That will just be Paul, though.
Oh, that one will just be me. It's all right. We'll work it out for the other ones. Should be fantastic fun to get everything back together. But that's because for the next 5 weeks, I just can't do Friday nights, no matter how much I would like to. So yeah, we'll get that one sorted. And we can't ask Sam to cover for us all the time because he is a busy individual who runs his own business and does his own content as well. It would be unfair to do that to him.
And before you ask Sam, no, it's okay. I need a rest anyway.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So 5 weeks, there'll be just some one-on-one interviews, which will be available here. For paid subscribers on YouTube, you'll be able to get them earlier. That's just one of the perks of being a paid subscriber. But I don't know how much earlier. It depends on when we record the interviews and get them all edited. But yeah, 5 weeks. It'll go like in flash. Nobody will notice that we're even gone.
And hopefully by the time we get back, we should finally have some access to some bigger people. But we'll wait and see.
I intend to hunt down that access like a white whale in a book written by Moby's great-great-grandfather.
So call this a mid-season finale, and we'll see you in about a month.
Mid-season finale? I think I've done one full episode. Well, 2 full episodes if you count this one. It's hardly a mid-season finale. It's more a case of just getting paid better money to be elsewhere. I love you guys, but I am being paid better money to be elsewhere for the next 5 weeks.
So we'll see you in about a month when we come back.
Yeah, but yeah, keep up for the interviews and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all those things that you're supposed to do on videos when you see them on the internet. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else we've got to get through.
No, we'll see you when we get back.
Brilliant. Yeah, everyone go and enjoy BHN Friday Night Edition, and we will catch you all in like 6 weeks, I guess.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Ka kite.